We go to the mercury fulminate website. Now I want to zoom in a little bit here. So we go from the pipe bomb article to mercury fulminate is used as a primary explosive in the fabrication of detonators. Then we go to material required. We have here a list of things including glass containers, tape, syringe. Then we go to a warning. Caution. Acid will burn the skin and destroy clothing. Then we go to this. This is the list that Julie found in the defendant's day planner. It's what she took a picture of. We wouldn't have this if she didn't take a picture of it because it wasn't in there anymore when the defendant's day planner was recovered by the police. So what we see here on this list, and we'll come back to this, but we see bottles, booze. So those could be glass bottles. And then we see syringe on this list. Then we see bag hands, like maybe if acid will hurt your hands. Maybe if you've seen that warning on that website. And next we have a website accessed about pool fun. This pool fun article, it talks about reversing the polarity of a pool. And the article claims that that'll cause an explosion. And again, is this true? Is that how that works? I don't know. But that's what the user of this computer, the defendant, was seeing and what he was looking up. And what do we have next? Nicotine. That's the next search. Who's the smoker here? It's Mark. Julie doesn't smoke. So we go to this nicotine search, the nicotine searches. Let's go back to this list. Nicotrol. That is the stop smoking drug that Dr. Borman prescribed to the defendant. Librium. That's also the defendant's prescription. His own drug supply. Who do you think is on the internet doing these searches? And just in case you weren't sure, these are the searches that end the browsing session. They're for Stiefel Nicholas employees. We see the Appleton office here. Remember that address? 740 Ford Street? It was in the defendant's planner, and David Thompson knew it too. Then for some reason, we're going to Colorado Springs. The employee, the branch manager, John Jock Joseph. We heard from Kelly why the defendant was very interested in John Jock Joseph. Because as we learned, the defendant had exhaustive conversations with Kelly Labonte about every man she had had any sort of sexual encounter with, including detailed descriptions of that man's penis. And Kelly Labonte knows that in the beginning it wasn't so detailed, but she did tell the defendant about John Jock Joseph, including a description of his penis, and she remembers that it was the fall of 1998, and she remembers it was before the Blueprint Conference because she remembered seeing him with the defendant, seeing John Jock Joseph and kind of pointing him out to the defendant. They had talked about this man before. There is absolutely no reason why Julie Jensen would be so interested in John Jock Joseph, but we know the defendant was. Then finally, we have the search for Kelly. So why is the defendant searching for Kelly? He knows her name, he knows where she works. But it's a search for Kellys, right? They're all Kellys here. What he wants to know, what the defendant is very interested in, is her last name. Kelly's married by this point, but she hasn't changed her last name yet. The defendant's trying to gauge her relationship with her husband. Has she bothered to change her name yet? Is she really committed to this new marriage? He wants to know, and so he's checking. Oh, she's still Labonte K. And that's how this browsing session ended. October 19th, early morning hours, another search for pipe bomb. Maybe Julie Jensen wanted to build a pipe bomb. Then we have the infamous Blueprint Conference. We see it reflected in the defendant's day planner. This is the conference in St. Louis, the early morning hours of November 7th. This is when the defendant was out drinking with a group at first, then the bar or club closes down, then they're in the lobby hanging out talking, and he ends up alone with Ed Klug. And they were wife bashing, and the defendant told Ed Klug about wanting to kill his wife, looking up ways on the computer to kill his wife, finding something that would crystallize you from the inside out. Now, we saw that video of Dawn Cooper, and I guess she was supposed to demonstrate that maybe that conversation didn't happen because she was also out in the lobby after bar close. But what happened in the end is she said that she left, and the only people there from her group were Mark Jensen and Ed Klug. And we know that it happened. We know that the defendant told these things to Ed Klug because of Joanne Klug. We know that Ed Klug talked to her multiple times the early morning hours and then again later in the day at the airport. She and Ed have been divorced for years now. I think they said it was finalized in 2013. She's never had a reason to lie about this. It's a very memorable conversation. They even have the phone records, right? Really, he was talking to his wife at those early morning hours? Well, yes, he was. Look at the phone records. And Joanne remembered something in particular. She remembered when Ed was at the airport, and she was thinking about, kind of ruminating on what Ed had told her, and she was confused because she was wondering, well, how does someone die from Benadryl? She remembers Ed telling her about the Benadryl. And so at the airport, she asks him that question about the Benadryl, and that's when Ed says to her, it's the antifreeze. Joanne Klug came in here and she had no reason to lie. She's long done with Ed Klug. But the truth is that conversation happened. And Ed told Stacy Bauer too. She remembers fewer details than Joanne. What she remembered is hearing that the defendant hated his wife and wanted her dead. But she does remember her immediate reaction when she heard less than a month later that Julie Jensen was dead. Oh my God, he killed her. And Stacy Bauer's opinion doesn't matter. It's not of significance. But what matters is she didn't know the Jensens. The only information she had was from Ed Klug. She knew what Ed Klug had told her when she made that statement. So we know that when Ed Klug got back from the Blueprint Conference, before Julie Jensen died, that he told Stacy Bauer about this deeply disturbing conversation that he had had with Mark Jensen. So that when Stacy hears Julie is dead, that is her first thought. Oh my God, he killed her. Finally, we know this conversation with Ed Klug is true. And we know how damning it is based on the defendant's reaction to it. And that's David Thompson. David Thompson is quite a character. He was in pretty big trouble in 2007. But whatever you want to say about him, when he came to court to tell you what had happened, what the defendant was up to, when he came to court to testify, he wasn't getting out of anything. He admitted he was a bank robber, but he's overcome that, and there's nothing to offer him today because he's not in trouble. Coming here for him was just an inconvenience. And with David Thompson, we have those recorded phone calls from the jail. We know that in the defendant's mind, this plot was real. This plot to sit on Ed Klug, so his testimony would never be heard. And we heard from the video of Nathaniel Clanton that this was the stupidest thing the defendant could have ever done. That's what he thought. But that's how desperately the defendant wanted to silence Ed Klug. There's absolutely no reason for David Thompson to get on the phone with the mother of his child, Kim, and give her Ed Klug's name and work address. The same thing that was in the defendant's day planner, the same thing that was on that internet search. There's absolutely no reason for David Thompson to tell Kim to say everything is as planned to the defendant when he gets on the phone. There's absolutely no reason for the defendant to be asking Kelly to give his parents $500 twice in the most evasive conversation possible. There's absolutely no reason for the defendant to be insistent that his mother get in touch with Kim in multiple calls, except that in the defendant's mind, this was a real plot. And think about that. Why didn't the defendant just leave it to the law and his lawyers? If Ed Klug's a liar, then that's what cross-examination is supposed to show. Cast doubt on him as a witness. And in fact, that's what Nathaniel Clanton said when the defendant discussed this plot with him. He's like, if you think you can beat your case, then why do you need someone to take a witness out? I want you to think about the defendant's thought process. There is a lawful, legal way to challenge Ed Klug's evidence in this case, just like there's a lawful, legal way to end your marriage with the wife you hate. But that's not what the defendant chose. And he's acting all cagey in these phone calls, thinking he's too clever to get caught. And even when talking to his mother, he references, gotta be careful on the phone. This weekend, when we know the defendant was in St. Louis, no internet activity. Once again, we see that pattern. But this weekend is significant in terms of what happened to Julie. She got sick that weekend, and kind of inexplicably so. She threw up on the carpet. And we know that this happened because that carpet cleaning bill, that's from that Monday, the 9th. She threw up on the carpet, and you can see it in the bill. It's also referenced in both of their day planners. Now, this is strange. For an adult to be so sick that they're throwing up in the carpet of their home, that's kind of how kids get sick. Very strange for an adult to be sick in that way. And we know Julie took care of the house, but she was so sick she apparently couldn't clean the carpets. She must have been really sick. Aaron Dillard knew about this. And this is how he explained the defendant cracking. Going from the defendant saying, this is all bullshit, and I didn't do it, to the confession. The defendant had been talking to Aaron Dillard about his case, getting advice from Aaron Dillard, like get those samples retested, which happened. He had been complaining a lot about Ed Klug. Then he told Aaron Dillard that he wished he hadn't made that mistake, had that drunken conversation with Ed Klug, said that's essentially what was screwing him in his case. And he said that it was on his mind because he tried to poison Julie before he left on that trip. He said he was lucky in a way that she didn't die because he really would have been screwed after saying what he said to Ed Klug. Aaron Dillard knew this, and Aaron Dillard said this, and Aaron Dillard described this admission from the defendant, opened the floodgates for the rest of the defendant's story. And this wasn't in Ed Klug's testimony. Ed Klug didn't know about Julie getting sick. Now, it was in Ted Voigt's testimony. That testimony, though, it didn't happen until January 2008. So that's half a year after Aaron Dillard came forward. And this is what you saw in that video the first week of trial. It seems like long ago now. But Ted Voigt talked about a time when Julie said she was throwing up. And he talked about how suspicious Julie became of the defendant trying to get her to drink something. And he described how Julie was telling him about the defendant trying to get her to drink some wine, and she didn't want to. And he was so insistent that it became a big argument. And I hope you can remember Ted Voigt's testimony, or at least look back on your notes. Because you see, that's the thing. This is such a massive case. There's so many facts and there's so much evidence, and it's hard to keep track of and wrap your mind around. And this incident with Julie getting sick that weekend, that's one of those hidden facts. What's the significance of it? Well, how would Aaron Dillard know? He was with the defendant for less than 4 days. How would he know? Why would he pull out that little fact? Unless the defendant told him, and told him that it was significant. So let's go to our next group of searches. The next timeline the computer gives us, November 10th, 1998, once again, the early morning hours. Here's the search for suicide. So maybe this is Julie. Maybe she's on the computer searching for suicide, joining some kind of suicide group or whatever. Let's see what comes next in this browsing session. We go to physician-assisted suicide, leading to a website about an advocate for physician-assisted suicide. Is 40-year-old Julie Jensen a good candidate for physician-assisted suicide? She's healthy. She has 2 young children. She doesn't have a terminal illness. What do you think Dr. Borman would have said if Julie came and asked him about whether physician-assisted suicide was for her? This search makes no sense for Julie. It does make sense for the defendant who's looking for a way to kill. Next, we have a toxicology website. Toxic alcohols. Ethylene glycol. (2:57 a.m.), so right along this same browsing session, we're back to nicotine. Now, we can't actually see every website that was visited. As Jason Ruff from the Wisconsin Department of Justice explained, we have the internet history, that's the Excel file, but we don't have the HTML files for all the websites visited, which means we can see that there were websites visited, but we can't actually see them on the screen. But even though we can't see the websites themselves, let's look at some of the websites that were visited on November 22nd, 1998. So 11:22, 4:50 p.m. Oh, 4:50 p.m. This is a Sunday. We have Anatomy Atom, poison. Anatomy Atom, that website comes up a lot on December 2nd and December 3rd. Then we have a Yahoo search, 11:22, 5:01 p.m. for drug interactions. Remember David Naring? David Naring knew the defendant told him that all the time the defendant was looking on his computer at work for drug interactions. Before Julie's death, after Julie's death. Just like Dave Naring said the defendant was looking for drug interactions, so we see it on the home computer. Then we go to the top and we get what looks like prescription list, rxlist.com, drug. Could that be Benadryl? At the very top, could that be diphenhydramine? Generic for Benadryl? All of these searches within minutes of each other, 11/22/98, a Sunday. Now let's go to 11/26/98. Got some science units, measurements. This is all 11/26/98, 11:06 p.m. Potassium chloride, pool solutions. Then 11/29/98, Sierra antifreeze. That website was accessed. 11/29/98. We know the computer history was deleted that day. So December of 1998, these are very significant searches that we're going to look at. This activity. Now we see there's something at 1:18 a.m., but that's actually not a browsing session. That was just one HTML that was accessed. So really in December, when we're talking about the browsing sessions, this is what we're going to be talking about. So we know about December 1st. We know that's the day that Julie goes to Dr. Borman, and we know that that's the day the defendant gives her the first dose of ethylene glycol, because by the early morning hours of December 2nd, she is showing the symptoms of ethylene glycol intoxication. She's acting drunk. That's the first stage of ethylene glycol poisoning. And so what happens when Julie is acting drunk in those early morning hours? 4:35 a.m., we have the search for paroxetine. Paxil. That's the antidepressant. And so this time, this is when the defendant goes on the internet and he looks up this website for paroxetine, Paxil, and he shows it to Julie, and he shows her all those side effects, a ton of side effects, as a way to soothe her worries, because she doesn't know why she's acting like this, why she's feeling like this, but she went to the doctor and she got that medicine, and so now there's an excuse. This doctor visit was very important to the defendant. Julie was scared. She wasn't just going to drink or eat what the defendant gave her, particularly when he was trying to force it on her, just like with the wine. But what if instead of force, he used deception? Something he's very well practiced in. What if he behaved how Julie wanted him to behave all along? What if he acted like he cared? What if he acted like he was concerned? What if he was good to her? He's making sure she's taking her new medication, something to drink along with it, and when she starts feeling these strange effects, he has something to blame it on, something he can show her on the internet, something to soothe her. Remember the morning of December 2nd? Julie Jensen talks to Margaret Voigt on the phone, her neighbor, and she sounded drunk. And that wasn't Julie, right? Every single witness who knew Julie told you she would not be drunk in the middle of the day. She sounded drunk because she was in the first stages of ethylene glycol poisoning, and Margaret Voigt was worried about her. But Julie said that Mark got the kids to school and he was being good to her. Right before that search for paroxetine or Paxil, we have a bunch of searches for Volvo cars. And this only matters because then we know it's not Julie. If she's sick, if she's feeling very strange, if she's looking for a reason, well, she's not looking at Volvo cars first. So that is the first internet activity, 4:31 to 4:35 on December 2nd. And I'm going to go through this internet activity in detail with you because this is an enormous case with so much material and so many witnesses and so much detail, but it's actually really simple. The person who was on this computer looking up ethylene glycol poisoning killed Julie Jensen. And I'm going to show you it was the defendant. So let's go. We're going to go to the second group of these searches, 8:14 to 8:49 a.m. And this is an unusual time to see internet activity on this computer, a unique time. And what we know about the morning of December 2nd is that the defendant didn't go to work. He got the kids off to school, David on the bus, Douglas to daycare, but he didn't go to work because he was going to Dr. Borman's that morning. So what happened in this next group of internet searches? We are going to see searches for ethylene glycol poisoning and specifically websites that include the symptoms of ethylene glycol poisoning. So I'm just going to page through these searches. Ethylene glycol poisoning, that's the first one. Oxalic acid, we learned that that's one of those breakdown products. Hard to say, I think it's fomepizole. That's the antidote. Toxic alcohols. How do patients with toxic alcohol ingestions typically present? We're getting to symptoms. Now for a moment, we're back to paroxetine, Paxil. What follows that? Ethylene glycol. We're seeing the symptoms: development of acidosis, tachycardia, hypertension, cardiogenic shock. And again, whether this is true or not, this is just on the internet, but this is what the person in front of the computer saw. So why is this research happening at about 8:15 a.m., starting at about 8:15 a.m.? The defendant has a problem. Julie has begun experiencing this first stage of ethylene glycol symptoms, and she's already worried about it. She's worried about it, and the defendant needs to know what's coming next, and he needs to know how to pacify her, or better yet, sedate her. So he decides to go to Dr. Borman. And this is what we saw from the defendant's book. Kelly told us about this book, how the defendant is planning to make some money off of this book. And he describes this trip to Dr. Borman, talking to the receptionist counter, explaining how yesterday Julie was here to see him. Let's look at his description of what he was doing. Wearing an expensive suit and a Rolex gives a presentation of authority and genuine legitimacy. And when accompanying a reasonable and polite request, frequently achieves the desired results. Really gives you a glimpse into the defendant's mind. He goes to Dr. Borman. He's got his suit. He's got his Rolex. He's giving a presentation of genuine legitimacy. Why does he have to give a presentation of genuine legitimacy?